What's the story you've been waiting to tell, but haven't had the right Askreddit thread yet? While working at a gas station, I had this one customer come in to buy cigarettes. He started to pull out his money to pay for them and he accidentally pulled out some needles out of his pocket. Seeing this, I decided to be a smart butt and say sorry, can't pay me in needles. He gets this sheepish look on his face and tells me he does some bad drugs. I'm assuming it's heroin cause it's a growing problem up here in Alaska, and asks me not to judge him. Which I told him I wasn't going to and sold him his cigarettes. After a couple weeks he comes in and tells me he's going into rehab, and I tell him I hope he succeeds. Cut to about 1 whole year later, he comes into the gas station and shows me his 9-month chip. Wow, that's actually great. Your interest and support probably saved his life. My drug dealer friend took me along on a drug buy with someone he'd never dealt with before. He liked to bring me with him because, even though I'm a generally non-violent, level-headed and nice guy, I'm very large and have a resting mean face, so I can be a little intimidating. Anyway, we go to this guy's apartment. There's 3 of them, very gangster in style. My friend is acting nervous. They show us the drugs, a quarter pound of weed, nothing big, and my friend gave him the cash. The guy in the middle starts chuckling, then says, why don't I just keep this money and the weed and you two just walk out of here? For some reason, it never even crossed my mind that he might be serious, and since he laughed, I assumed he was joking. I laughed, said that was funny, and said I think my friend would prefer to walk out with the weed. They looked at each other for a couple of seconds. Then he said aight, gave my friend his bag, and we left. My friend was paler than usual and he said holy frick, they were going to rob us. I told him he was being paranoid. The guy was obviously just joking. Didn't you see the gun? Nope. Apparently the guy doing the talking pulled out an automatic and held it on the coffee table, pointed at us while he talked about keeping the money. My eyes were on the drugs, money, and making eye contact. In hindsight, I should have said I saw it and seemed more like a bad butt to my friend, but I was surprised. If I had seen the gun, I would have walked out, happy to survive the experience. I had only contributed $40 to the wad of cash. In hindsight, I wonder what the guys who were going to rob us thought of my complete fearlessness. I almost drowned and was saved as a kid, kindergarten age, at a certain lake. 25 years later I went there with my GF and saved a kid from drowning. Didn't even think of the coincidence at the time. Exact same place, exact same way. The guy who saved me was the guy who was supposed to be watching me though. I saved a random kid. 25 years from now that child shall rescue another child, and so the cycle will continue. Freshman year of high school, puberty hit me like a brick. Pizza factory face. I was talking to my dad about how bad it was and he says he would have killed to have the acne I had. I had full face coverage, whiteheads, blackheads, the whole 9 yards. Then my dad shares his own story. When my dad was a sophomore in high school, same thing happened but much worse. Pizza factory with grease bee apparently. So bad that while he was in high school, he actually burned all the pictures of him from that time. Every day he would walk into school and this dong of a guy, I think his name was Robbie, calls him every name in the book for bad acne. My dad says nothing to him consistently. Summer rolls around and my dad comes back for his junior year with 85% or so of his acne clearing up. Robbie on the other hand, over the summer got almost as bad acne as my dad previously had. It was rough. First day of school my dad walks through the doors, sees Robbie, they make eye contact, and my dad just walks on without saying a word, like a freaking champion. Your dad is a far better person than I. When I was a kid I used to line up all my toy cars as if it were a huge traffic jam and then moved every car a few centimeters. I could do this for hours. Now I hate traffic jams. I did the same thing when I was a kid. Once, when I was a kid my mum sent me to the store to buy ice cream and gave me $10. On my way back in found $10 on the street. For a 8 years old kid that was like finding a $1K dollar sign but less noticeable and easier to pick up. I was excited. I ran back home and told my mum about it. Turns out she gave me $20. Plot twist, mother was lying and just wanted the extra $10. My friend thought my nickname was my real name for 7 years, and only discovered the truth when looking at my hospital paperwork. 7 years. Once I got trapped in the bathroom in the middle of Australia. Ended up with 5 people crammed in the tiny stall because they kept climbing over the door to try unlock from the inside, and then couldn't climb back out. When I was about 5 and my brother was 6, my father was showing us a revolver he borrowed. I pointed it at my brother's head with the full intention of pulling the trigger. My father snatched it away from me and yelled at me no and took the bullets out and handed it back to me. I'm sure in an alternate universe I pulled the trigger. Why the frick would anybody knowingly give a loaded gun to a 5-year-old? My girlfriend and I were at a theater watching The Lion King as a musical play. The lobby was absolutely packed with guests during intermission. She looks at me and says, "Wow, it's like the wildebeest scene in here," and a group of very overweight women in front of us got super offended. Stories involving my dog Patch, who just recently passed away on Wednesday. I have so many ridiculous stories about the things he did and how he behaved, and talking about them makes me feel a little better about his death. Here's a small one. Patch was very smart, as are most labs. I was teaching him to shake paws. I would have him sit, take one of his paws, and say shake. After maybe 10 minutes, he understood the command, and presented his paw when I said shake. I thought he was doing great, until I told him to sit, and he sat down and smacked me directly in the face with his paw. Didn't even wait for the command to shake. That became a habit he never grew out of. Every time he was told to sit, he would extend his paw. Still understood the command shake though. The paw would just be extended with 100x more enthusiasm if I told him to shake paws. So my cat Olive loves me, like a lot. I'm her favorite person. Now, I have a favorite spot on the couch, because it's next to an end table and closest to all the outlets. Olive often likes to lay on or beside me and snooze. It does not matter how dead asleep she is. If I get up from that couch, she senses it, gets up, and moves herself into my spot, no matter what. We've tested it and she gets up and walks into my spot when I'm less than 2 steps away from the couch. I've gotten up for 2 seconds, moved 5 feet away, and then turned around and she will be in my seat. Without fail, she will take my seat. And she never sits in that spot unless I've been sitting there first. She prefers the footstools otherwise. But we think she does it because she loves me. She wants my smell. It can't be for warmth because the spot she had previously been laying would be plenty warm. My other theory is that she does it so that when I come back, I have to see her and acknowledge her. I usually pick her up and put her on my lap because I feel guilty about making her move. So it may all just be a ploy to get cuddles lol. But as exasperating as it is, it does make me feel loved. Science shows us that cats manipulate us, but also truly love us. A girl that I had met on a forum website roughly 6-7ish years ago and I have kept in touch over all these years. She's amazing. She's beautiful, funny, smart, athletic, crazy, weird, just perfect in so many ways. Last Sunday I met her for the first time. We had a date and it was the best thing I've ever experienced. She'd been my best friend for so long and now since we don't live far away from each other anymore can try and make something work. She's everything I've imagined and more. So I'm pretty happy about it. That's pretty awesome. Most of my life in general, growing up was weird. My parents weren't awesome. They were narcissists among other things, but I made it through with only a few extremely crappy mental issues. One story that changed my life for a while, but I wish had gone differently. My dad is the embodiment of I am very smart, and one day he decided to build a machine to sharpen knives in the basement. He used the engine from a lawnmower. If that tells you anything, it blew up, scattered into pieces as soon as he touched a knife to the stone. It broke pipes in the basement, punched a hole through his thigh, shot several pieces of stone into his abdomen and sliced that area open, and nearly completely severed his arm. He managed to run up the basement stairs and get to the front door as he yelled at his girlfriend to call the police. At the time I had been in the upstairs bathroom of that rented townhouse, and I was in the process of wondering what the heck that loud noise was. I was 12 years old. I started heading down the stairs towards the front door, and then the memory of the event goes blank until some time later when I stood in a neighbor's house which I'd never been inside before. I was in their kitchen washing blood off of my legs, hands, and feet. I would later be filled in on why I was there, and where the blood came from. I had seen the blood and gotten several towels, which I carried over to my father, who was bleeding out at the front door. His girlfriend was screaming at the operator on the phone to send everything, that he was dying. My dad was holding his arm to his body, but it was still quite obvious that parts of his intestines were coming out of the hole in his midsection. I used the towels to hold his organs inside and slow the bleeding until the police, fire trucks, and paramedics arrived. Apparently he died twice on the way to the hospital, and he had lost 8 pints of blood. They couldn't believe he was alive. Even more unbelievable was that after using a bone from his calf area to replace several inches of bone from the arm that was severed, he was out of the hospital 21 days later. They thought he'd need quite a bit of physical therapy. I'm not sure what part exactly makes me annoyed by the situation. The fact that I saved his life, or the fact that afterwards he didn't care what I had done and was only interested in having me collect pieces of his bone from our blood-soaked basement. Yes, you read that right. At some point we found our little dog chewing on a piece of human bone, and after that he was set on collecting his missing pieces. But I was the only one who would go down there. At 12 years old I got to be the person who walked around a damp, molding basement, and pick pieces of bone whenever I helped with laundry. Extra points for when I noticed a piece of his flesh and bone has become stuck to one of the vents on ceiling. But, whatever, it happened. Crap man, that's horrible. I'm on the fence about your username though. It might check out. One night during the late 90s early zeros I was waiting to get into a club when bouncers ejected a woman who was very loud and trying to take swipes at them. The last one held her at arm's length and backed away. When he was almost back at the door she sprinted at him and kicked him hard in the ass. He turned but she was already running away while looking over her shoulder. If she had been looking forward she would have seen the small sports car bombing down the hill and probably wouldn't have been sent sailing over the roof. Everyone was holding their breath or calling an ambulance. When the police and ambulance arrived she suddenly jumped up and started being abusive and telling them to leave her alone. One officer picked up her handbag to look inside, but as he did she launched herself at him screaming not to look inside, it was private. It turns out she had a crap load of C in the bag and had been ejected for dealing while high as frick on her own supply. She was taken away in the ambulance and later charged, but not sure what she got or how injured she was. CS a hell of a drug. When I was a little kid, maybe 6 or 7, my family took my brother and I to McDonald's for some food. There happened to be a guy there dressed as Ronald McDonald, and he was taking pictures with kids. He approached our table, and upon posing between my brother and I, grabbed one of my chicken McNuggets and devoured it in one bite. After that day, I have vowed to destroy that clown and all he stands for. Not me, but my dad went into this laptop computer shop to buy a new laptop for work. He spoke to one of the employees and reserved this laptop for him for when he got back to the store. Fast forward a couple hours, my dad goes back into the shop and sees the employee that he spoke to. The guy's about to walk over to my dad when this butthole comes out of nowhere and jumps in front and asks about the same laptop my dad was looking at. To add, this guy winks at my dad as if to say, haha, you can wait. Meanwhile, my dad finds another employee and inquires about the laptop. She goes out back and finds it and says, lucky you, this is the last one in stock. As my dad's walking out of the store, he sees a butthole, who looks a bit disappointed. My dad winks at him and walks out. This is why I love my dad. In 2 days I'm going to get interviewed by, if I remember the name correctly, Social Security, and my mom wants me to act as special as possible to get as much money as possible. Thing is, I actually care about how I'm seen. I would rather not lower my integrity for $300, and I'm pretty sure it would make it harder to get a career. I also have no idea how legal pretending to be dumb for extra money is. I once saw a guy who was carrying an orange juice bottle with what I assumed was orange juice inside, until he threw his head back into a deep cough and spat a huge yellow chunk of phlegm into the bottle, continuing to carry it unfazed. One time, on a school trip, a chaperone texted a kid to ask where he was. He texted, "Look up," indicating that he was in plain sight from her if she'd look up from her phone. But she looked upward and saw a big construction crane. She thought he was on the crane. We all had a good chuckle over this later. This story is so wholesome and fun. I like you. So once when I was a tween, it just barely snowed, But this is Georgia, so we got a snow day. So I was home alone and decided that I wanted to go outside and see the snow. I bundled myself up and headed out to see the 5 inches of snow. When I decided I had had enough, I tried to go back inside. The door wouldn't open and the knob wouldn't turn. I had locked myself out. I sat down on the step and fearfully wondered how I was going to get back inside. Was I going to freeze to death out here? Could I go to the neighbors maybe? After about 30 minutes, I got up and tried again. The door was unlocked and I had been turning the knob the wrong way the whole time. This reminds me of the videos you see of dumb criminals who rob a store and think they have a security feature that automatically locks the door when the store's being robbed, only to find out they're supposed to pull the door open, not push it. I used to have a 35-minute commute down one of our more dangerous highways, known for a high percentage of crossover accidents. Each year I saw one fricked up thing on my way to or from work during this commute. Year 1. A semi-truck had managed to flip on its side in the median almost perfectly perpendicular to the highway. Traffic hadn't even backed up yet, so this had to have happened within a couple minutes of me getting there. Year 2. Driving back home around 11 PM. I see headlights facing me coming down the left lane. This is a 2-lane separated highway, so this is not right. I chose to keep driving in the right-hand lane and just hope the person thought they were on a 2-lane highway. A mile down the road I see all the cars that have been run off the road by this lady. A few days later I found a news article saying she'd eventually gone off the road and died. Year 3. I'm driving into work at 10 PM. And hear a kind of thump behind me. I look over and see that there is a car beside me matching my speed. Except they are driving on the hill next to the highway instead of driving on the road at 75 miles per hour. This car doesn't attempt to slow down, but they do start veering back towards the highway, at which point I floor it and get as far away as possible. I eventually saw them spin out on the hill about 100 feet before a bridge. I had to call a friend to make sure I wasn't dreaming that one, since I hadn't seen the car cross over from the other side and had no idea where they had come from. This is my braggart feel good about myself story that I never have a reason to tell PPL. I was the DD on my senior prom night. I was driving a car full of people to the after party, and our route took us down one of those 55 miles per hour highways, and we see this woman frantically running down the road, with traffic moving to avoid hitting her. After we slowly pass her, I see a small beagle running in and out of oncoming traffic ahead of us, and being a beagle owner myself at the time, quickly realized she's chasing her runaway hound. All the drunk teenagers in my car urged me to drive on, as they didn't want to see the dog get hit. I drove past the dog, with my hazards on, get out and kneel down and call to the dog. It sees me ahead, and runs straight into my open arms. I held the dog and waited for the woman to catch up. She approaches me in an absolute emotional physical breakdown. She was bawling, out of breath from running, and literally couldn't even muster up a word. I carefully handed her her runaway pup, with a big smile on my face, and said hold on to him. She was still gasping for air, and just nodded her head. She couldn't even get out a thank you. I got into my car and continued my night of sober responsibilities, and she walked away with her safe pup. Thinking about that moment of handing her dog still makes me smile. I was in college when John Kerry was running against George W. in 2004. It was an urban campus, and I went to class as usual on one day. There was a stage and all sorts of political crap set up on the main street right next to the building where my class was being held. Typical in a college town. I sit down in my class, street level classroom, and we get started. All of a sudden, John Bon Jovi starts singing. There is a full-blown Bon Jovi concert happening about 10 feet away from my classroom. Of course, nobody could hear crap within the classroom. My nerdy as crap professor was visibly fuming. The first song ends, and my professor marches to the window, opens it, and screams if Bon Jovi is going to hold a concert outside of my syntax class, then I'm just going to have to teach syntax that much more intensely. Nobody learned anything about syntax that day, and John Kerry and John Bon Jovi are to blame. If your professor thought Bon Jovi was going to stop playing, he was living on a prayer. One time in kindergarten my teacher told me to stay in the classroom while everyone else went outside to play. I don't remember what I did, but she was going to get the principal and that freaked me out, so I hid under a desk. My teacher and the principal came in and were looking for me when I ran out from under the desk, kicked my teacher in the shin, and ran outside. I then hid on the jungle gym and watched them look for me again. I don't remember anything after that part. The same year for show and tell I brought in my Barbie photo album filled with pictures of my mom's friend's bachelorette party with male strippers and sequin speedos. I think the two events could potentially be connected somehow. When my mom asked me why I brought those pictures to show and tell, I responded with, because they're the funniest things I've ever seen, if that gives you any indication of the kind of child I was. 30 years ago I briefly dated a guy that later played Russian roulette with a gun and committed suicide as a teenager. But while we were seeing each other, we went to his friend's house whose parents were gone for the night. I remember the house, the friend, the painted nude of his grandmother over the mantle. Fast forward and I'm 95% sure that the mother of that friend is one of my favorite tax clients. Where she lives, an only son, his age, an affinity for art, and her child being a mix of two races. It all fits. I've been in her house as a 15-year-old, but I could never tell her because it wouldn't be appropriate professionally, and I think there's a negative connotation with the guy I dated. He wasn't allowed to visit his friend. I think the parents were discouraging the friendship. Had a crush on my 8th grade teacher Ms. Harold. The students would make fun of her because of how emotional she was and made her quit after several sad experiences, including having a seizure in front of the class. She went to one of my soccer games when no one supported me. Didn't hear from her ever since. Once when I was a kid, my little sister was annoying the crap out of me while we were eating lunch, so I did what any rational older sibling would do. I peeled what was left of my PB&J apart and threw it at her face. It stuck to her forehead and slowly peeled off and fell to the floor. It was perfect. I got grounded. Worth it. I spent 2 years and 3 months completing a visit to every African country, without heading home in between and without flying at any point. It was all overland and I never bribed anyone. I got all the visas I needed on the continent. It seems I'm the first person in history to visit every country in Africa completely without flying, but the story never took any interest within the public. It was as a part of a bigger project and I promoted every country on my way as positively as I could. When I was a teenager I was at Universal Studios with my soccer team. A few of us were in line for the brand new Hulk ride. We had been in line for over an hour and were still so far from the ride, so we decided to give up. We see a guy about 30 feet ahead of us get out of the line by stepping over the barricade and following a path that we assumed was an exit. 2 of us decide to do the same thing. We walk through a barricaded path around some platforms and up a flight of stairs to a double door. When we open the door, it's the staging area of the ride and an employee immediately points to us and says, "You two," right there, and points to 2 open seats on the ride. Was once taken, willingly, by an old lady to a house in the slums close by home, and surprisingly, it was an incredible experience. She gave me cookies, chocolate milk and brought me back when I asked. It's like the complete opposite of what could have happened in those situations. I really want to hear the full story because this is super sweet. My 27th great grandfather was the Prince of Wales, and he is a direct descendant from the King of the Britons. So basically bow down to me. About a week ago I fainted in the washroom. I had been dealing with abdominal pain all evening and at about 4 in the morning last Monday I got up to use the washroom. I was washing my hands when all of a sudden the pain came back in full force. I broke out into a cold sweat and started hyperventilating, then my vision went dark. Next thing I know I bang my forehead on the edge of the counter and curl up on the washroom floor waiting for my vision to come back and praying that this isn't how I go. When I was in year 5, this kid in my class asked the teacher if he can go to the bathroom. He wasn't allowed, so he got up and literally shat on the teacher's desk, without even caring that other kids were looking at him. Didn't see him since. My mother always told me if the teacher said no after I asked to use the bathroom and I had to go, I was to go anyway. That guy right there is a freaking soldiers. I attended a very small Catholic 612 school for 3 years. This event happened during my first year there, in 7th grade. One Monday, I was homesick from school. I was in the noodle cabinet and found my late dad's tear spray from the military up there. I sprayed it to see if it still worked, and much to my immediate and intense dismay, I found that it did. As I was wearing my school uniform hoodie, I reflexively put it in my pocket, as if it were a pencil, and forgot about it. The next day, I wore that same hoodie to school without realizing that I still 100% had that tear spray in my pocket. It was a church day, too, so I was doing a lot of standing, sitting, and kneeling. It fell out of my pocket as we stood up to sing the final hymn, and my scene friend noticed it and grabbed it. On the walk back to the school, she sprayed some onto her hand and touched her contact wearing eyeball to see what would happen, and my other scene friend sprayed it directly into her mouth. As they were busy being incapacitated, I got taken into the disciplinarian's office and nearly got skinned alive. He made it very clear that bringing tear spray counted as a weapon. I told him it was an accident, and he miraculously believed me. I somehow didn't get expelled, suspended, or even detention for it, and this is the same school where I got detention for having a shoe untied. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.